So hi everyone, I'm Jeremy Clark. I'm from Concordia University in Montreal. I actually do have slides, but I came from Montreal this morning, so I was a little late. So I'll just talk through the issues as opposed to using them. Okay, so when Holly asked me to do this, I was working on this thing called Liquid Democracy. I thought it would be cool to talk about. It's kind of academic, but then I looked through the program itself and talked to Alex as well, and I don't know, it just seemed kind of esoteric. And so what I thought I would do is sort of just zoom out one level and talk about the context in which this thing called Liquid Democracy, which you probably don't even know what that is yet, is coming from. And so what I'm going to talk to you about is, this is future technologies. I want to sort of tell you what is going on in kind of what you might call Silicon Valley, so the tech industry. And if you go and talk to people in Silicon Valley or other technologists, they do have a different kind of view of democracy. And they're building tools that they think will enable this slightly different view of what democracy looks like. So I want to just give you a kind of a survey, a landscape of what these tools are. I'm not going to do a deep dive into any of the tools specifically. I'm also happy to talk about voting. So normally I talk about Bitcoin and blockchain. That's sort of my thing now. But I have worked on voting for 10 years, and I will squeeze blockchain in because it's one of the tools that Silicon Valley is talking about. Why do you care what Silicon Valley thinks? So hopefully you stick around for the session for new media and you see the influence that big tech companies have had over social media, which has a direct consequence on democracy. And so they're not big enough to push through things by themselves, but at the same time, they're influential. So we should probably pay attention to what they think. So I'm going to give you 4 kind of tools that are being talked about. But before I do, let me give you the overarching theme. So this is the sort of common denominator of all of these tools. What people want is, what they're looking at is a move toward direct democracy. So direct democracy means that instead of a representative voting for them once every 4 years, and then they go and turn around and vote 200, 300 times on your behalf, what we want to do is, not we, but what they want to do is they want to enable the voter to participate more often, okay? So this could be more referendas, it could be participatory budgeting, it could be you literally vote on every bill that goes before the House of Commons. There's talks about how you might hack the existing system to make this happen. You could have a political party who runs a candidate who just promises to basically hold a referenda on everything that they're supposed to do. So you trust them, but they serve as a proxy. They go to the House of Commons, but they vote according to what people on their website say. So these are the conversations that we're hearing. Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? So that's going to depend a lot on your politics and what you think. But what I will tell you right now, what I think we can say conclusively is it's not thought through. So we really need to sit down and think these things through, take them seriously, and figure out, is this actually going to work? What are the consequences? And so this is almost sort of a call to arms as well, especially for the researchers in the room. We're really interested in sort of understanding these technologies. So I'll just give you the sort of pros and cons, and then I'll go into the actual tools themselves. So the big con is that there's some people that argue, like Brian Kaplan at George Mason, who wrote The Myth of the Rational Voter, that voters aren't really experts. And so if you go and you ask their opinion on all the bills that go before Parliament, they're not going to do a good job at actually voting on that. So when you have a representative, they can acquire some expertise, and so that's one argument. Now, on the flip side, especially more in the US context as opposed to Canada, you see that financing is a big issue, right? And so from a lobbyist perspective, you would much rather deal with a single person. You'd rather devote all your energies to changing the mind of one person than changing the minds of lots of people. So this is seen by the Silicon Valley people as sort of a sort of way of sidestepping the role of money in politics, as well as enabling new technologies. The other big problem is it puts a huge burden on the voter. It puts a burden on the electoral system as well. You have to set up all of these elections, and then the voter is going to vote, a couple times a month or whatever, at whatever schedule. Voters aren't going to keep up. They're not going to keep up with the news and the issues and those types of things. So the tools that they're building are basically trying to resolve that issue. How can we reduce the burden when we move towards direct democracy. That's sort of the philosophy that we're seeing, okay? So here's the tools that they're talking about. The first tool we've already seen, it's online voting. If you can vote online, you can set up an election, you can do it in 3 clicks. And that basically is what you need. You're not going to have lots and lots of referendums throughout the year and have people show up in person with polling places, hiring election officials to sit there and all of that type of stuff, okay? Online voting has pros and cons. So on one hand, it does enable some people who have trouble with the current system, for example, voters with disabilities. It's great. If you are a voter with disability and you can already browse the internet and there's lots of great assistive technologies, then that's fine, you're set. It's going to disenfranchise the flip side, like Alex's grandma, who don't have a computer, they don't have a device, they don't have the internet. In this case, there might be ways of upholding telephone voting or vote by mail alternatives. But anyways, so you have a sort of flip side. Then there's all the security issues, okay? So the actual cybersecurity issues. So the most visible problem with online voting is what happened in Ontario, which was basically the servers were unavailable, okay? And in this case, it just seemed that it was bad planning on behalf of the voting companies. We've already seen in the Canadian context as well, people might do that from an adversarial perspective. So they may try to bring down the voting system by doing a denial of service attack. So for example, in the NDP, one of their internal leadership elections, that was a particular problem. So this is fine. This is something that we should concern ourselves with. But the thing is that you can always throw more bandwidth at the problem, and denial of service is solvable. It's going to be solved if Ontario goes ahead with online voting in the next election cycle. It's going to be a solved problem. What we're really concerned about are the invisible threats, the ones that you don't see, right? The invisible threats are, what if someone breaches the server? Maybe it's an insider, maybe it's someone externally, but they breach the server and they change votes. How are you going to know that your vote actually was counted correctly? How do you know that it wasn't changed? It's not like online banking, right? People say, well, I can bank online. That's high security. Why can't I vote online? Well, if you bank online and there's fraudulent transactions, you see them, right? You can see them. You can call the bank. You're not legally liable for it. And the bank will tolerate a certain amount of fraud because it's good business to do online banking as opposed to having lots of people show up at their brick and mortar stores. So they still, or the banks themselves. So they still make money in the long run. With online voting, you can't see your vote because of the secret ballot. Okay, so the secret ballot provision is the thing that stops or makes online voting a uniquely different prospect than pretty much any other service that you might want to do online that's also security sensitive. I'm convinced that for these major voting companies, from what I know from how their backends work, there probably is one person, maybe they're in the IT room somewhere, who could probably tell how you voted if they wanted to peek. That's the way that these systems are set up.
But they say they don't look.
But they say they don't look, yeah. Anyways, and then you have the problem of, okay, I'm going to vote from my computer. What if there's malware on it? It's going to change my vote. Alex is standing over my shoulder. He's paying me, $10 to vote a certain way. He can watch me vote. Better yet, I could just give him my password, and he can just vote on my behalf, right? So there's all the sort of coercion issues that we see in the vote selling issues as well. So anyways, that's the sort of online voting. So that's one tool. Now, a complement to online voting is this thing called blockchain, which you may have heard of. If you haven't heard of blockchain, you've probably heard of Bitcoin. It's been in the news. Blockchain comes out of Bitcoin. In 2 minutes, it's hard to sort of explain because it's kind of a difficult concept. But let's just try our best in terms of the context of voting. So normally, I have a voting server, so it's here. I put it in the middle. All the voters are going to connect to it, and they're going to deposit their votes. Okay, so they're all sitting at this one location. And there's this sort of political problem of who's the person that holds this database, because they have a lot of power, right? And all the security sort of rested in one position. There's a single point of failure. For voting, it actually makes a lot of sense. There are natural parties that can play that role. There's a lot of other industries where blockchain is a much more exciting proposition where there is no clear person who's going to put that database up. But anyways, the idea of blockchain is whoever's writing or reading from the blockchain, why don't you give them the database instead? So everyone gets a copy of the database, and then all blockchain really is this like super synchronization protocol, where when you change your local copy of the database, it gets reflected with everyone else. So everyone looking at their local copy knows that their local copy is the same as everybody else who's looking at their local copies. And then there's no database in the middle, okay? So that's blockchain. Now, what does blockchain do for voting? Well, first off, if you take the database, as bad as it might be that one company owns this database, if you give this database to every person who's voting, then everyone can see, at least out of the box, how everyone else is voting. So there's no secret ballot, okay? And there's also a running tally. You can see sort of, as the votes come in through the day, how candidates are doing. So this is illegal. It's also, just you want a secret ballot, right? So it's not just, it's not a good idea. You can think about ways that you might layer a confidentiality layer on top, but usually what ends up happening is somebody at the end of the day they have to recover the tally. They have the power to recover the tally. And that person is the most powerful person, and since they have that power already, they might as well just put the database up in the middle. Now, blockchain can do a few things. So I, often say that, I'm sitting and I'm going to design a voting system. I have 10 problems that I want to solve. Blockchain solves the 8th problem on that list, which is it actually gives you a very good tamper-evident immutable log. So if there's any election events that you want to record and you want to make sure that they're time-stamped well, securely, then you can have a blockchain server sitting on the side, but it's not going to be your primary technology that's used. So we've used it in that context ourselves. Another thing too is people talk about identities being on a blockchain. So that's an example where there's no single party that would run an identity database. Because your identity is sort of decentralized, right? You have identity associated with maybe your health card, your driver's license. These are all government, but they're from different branches of government. I have my employee card, that's from my employer. Who's going to put up the database that has all my identity in one place? Well, maybe a blockchain could solve that particular problem. There's all sorts of nasty problems with that as well. But anyways, that for voter registration, maybe blockchain plays a role there. Another thing you can look at is, can we take what underlies blockchain, which is cryptography, and can we kind of remix it? Instead of using cryptography to solve this blockchain problem, could we just take those primitives and apply them directly to voting to try and make voting better? So the good news here is that's absolutely a great approach. In fact, the year I was born, the very first person had that idea and wrote an academic paper about it. The next year, he wrote an academic paper about how to solve digital cash. So Bitcoin and digital cash and voting actually have this really entangled history when you look at the cryptography. But anyways, if you add a cryptographic layer to just a traditional voting system, not even an online voting system, even think about a paper-based voting system, then you can provide voters with verifiability. What crypto does is sort of magic. For Bitcoin's case, it allows you to make currency out of thin air. It doesn't exist. There's a bunch of computers. They don't trust each other, and somehow it all works. That sounds like magic. Crypto's magic, right? What the crypto magic can do for you in the context of voting is you can look at your vote. You can see that it's being counted correctly, but you can't actually see the contents of your vote. So you get both integrity and you get ballot secrecy. You can have both, but you need sort of the magic of crypto to make that happen. So anyway, these systems are called end-to-end verifiable voting systems, something that we worked on for many years. They're largely academic projects. Sometimes we see vendors that try and give you the same user experience without actually having the actual cryptography done right. But anyways, that's another topic. Okay. Another tool, there's two more that I'll talk about. One very, very quickly. So let's go back to the problem of we have to vote lots of times because we're in this direct democracy future. And it's too burdensome. I don't want to follow the news that closely. So what can we do? So there's two technologies that are sort of touted within Silicon Valley circles. One is that you don't have every voter vote in every election. What you do is you do what's called a random sample of voters. Maybe it's 1%. That's going to be representative of the whole. And as long as you can guarantee that that random sample is actually a random sample, then you can sort of reduce the cost and the burden of voting and still get the right outcomes. So people who have worked on cryptographic voting are looking at that issue. The other thing is what I came here to talk about originally is liquid democracy. Liquid democracy is Silicon Valley's kind of fancy term for something that's a very familiar concept, which is delegative democracy. So instead of, if I don't want to vote, but I know Alex is following the votes, that's great. I'm going to delegate my vote to him. However he votes, that counts for me too. So that's the scenario. And what you can do is you can even split it up. So maybe Alex, I want Alex to vote for me because he believes in, I don't know if this is true, but free market principles. And so that, for economic issues, but on national security, he's not that great. I trust Holly a lot better on national security. And so I want to delegate my vote for national security issues to her. So you could have like referenda items come tagged, and then you could set up your delegations differently depending on the tags, and you can see how you could throw lots of technology at this and make it like kind of a slick process. So liquid democracy is interesting. The big challenge in liquid democracy is the same challenge in online voting. It's the same challenge in blockchain voting. It's a secret ballot. The secret ballot is problematic. What does a secret ballot mean in the context of liquid democracy? So if I delegate to Alex, he's on, in terms of, he's going to vote for free market principles, maybe he doesn't, right? So do I get the right to see how he actually voted because I delegated my vote to him? Right, that's maybe a reasonable case. But then if I just want to know how Holly votes because I'm curious, then I could just delegate to her to learn how she votes. There's other problems like cycles, like I could delegate to Alex, he could delegate to me, then our vote goes nowhere. You might want to know the weight, like how many people have delegated to you. And so then you can go around and you can coerce people and see if your delegation count goes up after you tell them to delegate to you. And so anyways, thinking through all of this is interesting. Also, who's going to play the role of delegatees? Are they going to be famous social media personalities? This is an area that's very, very interesting. Anyways, I'm chock out of time, so thank you very much.